Well, welcome back to the network. And today we're at LaGuardia International Airport. And today we're meeting with Ralph Tamburro of the Port Authority here in New York and New Jersey. And first of all, Ralph, thanks for spending some time with us here at the network and sharing your story
Yeah,
and
my
your
pleasure.
experience here in this airspace. Ralph has 31 years, had 31 years of experience with the FAA. Started off in the air traffic control and has held a lot of other leadership positions, and we'll talk about that. And he's currently with the Port Authority and has been here for 12 years. Ralph has a passion around safety, innovation, and continuous improvement when it comes to airspace and operations. While we often focus from the cockpit perspective here at the Old Fly Guy Network, today we're going to get a kind of a unique look at the operations side and what happens behind the scenes and to keep the facilities and the airspace safe. Thanks once again, thanks for setting this up for us today. I think this is going to be a little different spin on what we talk about, but I think that most people probably don't have a real good feel for what happens either when they get on the airplane or what's going on behind the scenes. And while I really want to hear about how you help, manage the New York airspace, I think I'd like to start off with kind of a perspective of how you got here. What was the kind of timeline? Those are a number, 31 and 12. There's a lot of years in keeping things going here, more probably from ground-based operations. And what was I'd like to hear about what the catalyst was that kind of got you started, and what was that spark that kind of motivated you to get into this, lifestyle and all these projects.
So thanks, and it's my pleasure again. This is a passion of mine. I grew up very close to LaGuardia, a couple of miles away, so I was very familiar with some of the traffic patterns way back when. But actually what started me in aviation was the air traffic controller strike. I was actually a computer operator at the time, working shifts and things like that. But once the strike came along, me and a friend of mine decided to take the test. The rest is history. I passed. I was hired pretty quickly. Started in January of 1982, and was sent to the New York TRACON, which is the Terminal Radar Approach Control facility for the New York metropolitan area. And I will be honest, I didn't know what a TRACON was when they sent me there. So it was
that was in '82.
In 1982, yeah.
Okay.
And when I got there, they did a quick introduction of what the facility was like. It was very interesting, and then we were sent down to Oklahoma City for 3.5 months. That was a little difficult at the time. I had young kids at the time, so a little troublesome, but we made it work. Past there, that was a pretty stressful environment because everything was condensed. And then came back to the facility, went through another series of training sessions, both classroom and lab, and then we started on the job training. This was still pretty close or right after the strike. So staffing was minimal staffing at the time. A lot of supervisors were working, and there were some controllers working as well. So it was pretty interesting time frame. Got through the trainings, fully certified. And I did manage. I was a controller for LaGuardia Airport.
Okay.
So on top of it, so LaGuardia does have a special place in my heart. Always has. I always feel it's one of the most efficient airports here in the New York area. Even though it does have problems, it generally runs extremely well. Very small footprint for an airport, but also very busy. Right after the strike, traffic was low, but quickly, I would say within a year or two, the traffic levels started to increase back to normal levels.
Mm-hmm.
Progressed there, worked as a controller for 8 to 9 years. Then I went into traffic management, which was something brand new back then. We never had a full traffic management unit. So that was an interesting transition. Did that for several years, then went to a traffic management supervisor. and then eventually I was an ops manager, and then eventually my last position in the FAA was a traffic management officer who was responsible for the flows for the entire New York, New Jersey airspace. So pretty complex. Most people don't realize all the people involved with air traffic control besides the controllers themselves. Most people think, well, it's the tower, right?
That's right.
Tower is a small part of the air traffic system.
So let me get this right. You had 3 months in Oklahoma. You came back for how many months before you were on the job?
That was probably at least another 2 months, maybe 2.5 months.
Okay, so
to get
something
to the
less
next
than 6 months, you went from not sure what TRICON was to being part of the operation on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
And just kind of put everything in perspective for everybody. So what airports constitute the large airports that are in the New York airspace?
So, I've always professed that there's 5 major airports in New York,
Okay.
besides the obvious ones. And when we say New York, I'm not excluding New Jersey.
Okay.
Jersey is, when we talk about Newark
Right.
and Teterboro, we consider them part of the New York
Right,
airspace.
that's what I wanted to share with everyone.
Right. So besides the obvious ones, Kennedy, LaGuardia, Newark, we have Teterboro is a very busy airport, general aviation, mostly business aviation at this point, and White Plains or Westchester County Airport, which is a mix of general aviation, business aviation, and air carrier operations.
Okay, and then you have the 3 major, right in
Newark,
between
LaGuardia, and Kennedy. And then we have, there's a number of other smaller airports in the region. I forget the exact number, but it's somewhere in the 30 range, 35. We got Republic, you got Long Island, MacArthur, Bridgeport, New Haven, Stewart, which is one of the Port Authority airports, Morristown, Caldwell. I mean, there are a lot of smaller airports that many people don't realize.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I did an interview at Teterboro several months ago, and they had no idea that Teterboro existed, and they didn't live that far from Teterboro. So it's pretty interesting to realize that people don't always know that airports are nearby.
Well, I'm pretty confident, we're just getting started, that by the time we're done talking, there is going to be a much greater sense of clarity around what that net looks like, how big the volume is, the airspace, and the different things that you're helping manage. So to me, it's just pretty impressive to think, and again, I'm sure there was a lot of pressure at the time to put you from ground zero up to operating in 5 months.
Right.
I can tell you from my general aviation perspective and thinking and talking to controllers and how efficient they are, and 99% of the time I feel very comfortable. Sometimes a little bit intimidated, but I think most many general aviation folks might say a little bit of the same thing, because I know personally we want to make sure it's spot on,
Right.
but there's a lot of help there if you just open up.
Yeah, well, general aviation discussions or frequencies, communications can be challenging. Back when we started off with just LaGuardia operations. Actually, Flushing Airport was still operating at the time, believe it or not. And Flushing Airport was very close to LaGuardia. But a couple of years after I started, 84, I think was the exact year, Westchester County approach control came down to the New York TRICON. And that was put into LaGuardia area. And we had to train on that. It was a much different operation. We're very used to professional pilots and working with them. And then we had to transition to where we had a lot of student pilots. And it was a pretty drastic change. Took a lot of patience, I will say. But once you got used to it, you learn that don't talk as fast as you do to a commercial pilot. Slow it down a little bit actually saves you a little bit of time, because they're not asking to repeat. It is a person that is probably nervous flying. So you just try to help them and be a good guider of their flight.
Right, and I see that a lot myself, that if they understand you're just, you're in the, not only learning, but developing that skill. So you got the the timeline around the FAA, and then you made a transition to the Port Authority, and kind of how'd that happen? What did that 12 plus years look like?
So let's talk about a little bit. Let me just clarify. I started on the job training. I was fully certified a year later.
Okay.
So roughly 16 to 18 months, I was fully certified. And the reason for that back then is there was a lot of pressure to certify people,
I bet.
right? Because
We didn't have
yeah,
anybody.
staffing was very minimal. So there was a lot more pressure to get people certified. And we did actually very well. You know, the class I was in, there was 11 of us. This is pretty interesting. There's 11 of us. And at that time, the failure rate out of Oklahoma City was roughly 50%.
Wow.
So they sent 11 of us down expecting 5 or 6 people to come back. All 11 of us came back. So they didn't really know what to do with us right away. But so what they did is they split us up between LaGuardia area and the Newark area. That's how we split up.
Okay.
And a good percentage of us made it. I think of the 11, I think there was 8 of us that made it, which was a very high percentage from back then.
Right.
Especially since all of us had no experience, no aviation experience.
Right.
So like I said, I progressed through my career through the various positions. 2013 is when I left the FAA for several different reasons. You know, there was this job opportunity at the Port Authority, and it was, you know, program manager for airport delay reduction, which kind of was the same, a similar role as I was playing in the FAA, right? I was initiating new concepts, new ways, new procedures to try to expedite the traffic, reduce the delays, because we do experience quite a few delays in the New York area. You know, it was almost a joke when I would tell people, you know, what my job is, delay reduction. They're like, I'm like, well, it's just a passion of mine to help the operation be as efficient and safe as possible. So then I took this job. Actually, the person I interviewed happened to be a former FAA person as well that I worked with. So I got the job. You know, started looking at ways to make improvements, and you know, through my connections with the people, remaining people in the FAA, plus I had a very good relationship with all the major airlines, business aviation. I had established all those relationships, so it was really just a natural progression for me to be in this job. Offered me a lot more flexibility, because in the FAA you do have some limitations of what you can do and participate in. But here I didn't have those limitations. So I've done projects with NASA. I've done projects with you know, many companies. We look at some future technologies, you know, what's coming down the road. Because the one thing in air traffic, and most people are aware of this now, is that technology is very slow to be integrated or in air traffic systems. You know, when I used to do tours in the FAA, I would, you know, we probably, in the traffic management unit, probably had about 20 to 25 scopes
Oh, really?
or displays, I'll say. One radar scope, 25 computer displays, and the most important one was this small little display in the middle that was, you know, it was like a 12-inch monitor from like the 80s. And we said, that is the most important computer, but it's also the oldest, right? Finally now, and this shows you how long ago it is, we are just getting into the new technology now. So within the next 3 years here in the New York area, we'll have electronic flight strips for the towers. This is a major step, where now they currently still use paper flight strips. The approach control,
stack them up
yep,
there.
you stack them up, you put it, you slide them into those holders, and you know, that's how you keep track of your aircraft. I mean, as you're working a radar, even a radar display, you don't have you do have a rack, but you tend to put them in front of you, and you write on them just to remind you of things that you've done.
Sure. So again, you sort of answered. I was wondering what the difference in life in the FAA versus the Port Authority, and what that skill set and the motivation and your desire, that twinkle to make things better. It seems like it was a natural, pretty comfortable transition probably.
Yeah, it was actually very comfortable. It took a little while. I had limitations because when you transition from the FAA, you have limitations on working directly with the FAA again.
Sure, sure.
So it was approximately about a year. But once we got beyond that year, I was able to start, coming up with recommendations. Again, work closely with the people I was working with prior, maintain those relationships. But we developed one project that we worked on was collaborative decision making. This was a project or a program that the FAA developed, working with the airlines. Because years ago, when I first started, air traffic was the decision maker. That's it. We didn't care what anybody else said, right? That's where some of that attitude comes from, by the way. But slowly but surely, the airlines would complain. I don't want to say complain. They would discuss with us the issues that they were facing. Really did open air traffic's eyes because we didn't realize.
Right.
We don't know the airline business. We know the air traffic business.
Right.
And what works for me that may not work for the airline. So we slowly started working together. The FAA came up with this concept. But one of the pieces that was always missing was the airport.
Okay.
Right? I mean, you have air traffic, you have airlines. Well, if you don't have an airport, you're not going anywhere, right?
Right.
So we pushed, meaning the Port Authority pushed to start up airports as being part of the collaborative decision-making process.
A seat at the table.
Yes. So we did push it, and we eventually got it. It's a few years. Now it's about 4 years that it was officially, that airports were accepted into the program. I've been part of that, and collaborative decision making. There's a lot of work groups that are developed to address certain issues. I've been a part of many of those. Very successful program. In fact, we're just starting a new one to talk about airport construction, because that's one of the major issues for airlines, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are kind of unique. We are recognized as having one of the best airport construction programs on how we present it to people. We typically, any project we do here, we typically will brief a year to 2 years in advance. That's how much how important it is to an airline.
Right.
But there are many airports around the country that don't do that. They'll just
start
next month we're starting this project.
Right.
It's not enough time for an airline to plan for that. So that's one of my major tasks now is I manage a lot of the coordination between the airlines and the Port Authority on construction projects. We have a major project at JFK. Besides redevelopment, we're talking about taxiways and runway construction. So that's what one of the projects we're working on now. Newark, we're just finishing up a runway project that happened earlier this year. I'm sure you heard about that one too.
Well, Newark just gets all kinds of bad press. Fortunately or unfortunately, they are in the bad press category.
But Newark's always had that.
Yeah, right.
If you really look back at the history, Newark has always had a very bad press for some reason.
It's got just a negative cloud around it. From a user perspective, I can't tell you the number of times. Every time I've gone there, I have to say that there's been a number of times that there have been problems or just delays. That's just it, just delayed, nothing else. But you talk to anybody going to Newark, and they're like, "Oh no, don't do that."
It's a very complex operation, both on the surface, but the airspace itself is very complex, and that's what the general public would not see, right?
Right.
You have a lot of interaction between Newark and Teterboro, Newark and Morristown, which is a busy general aviation airport as well. So it's a lot more of a complex piece of airspace, which causes some of that. But it's also the interaction between the other major airports in New York that create this congestion problem.
Right.
As an example, if you take Newark, LaGuardia, Kennedy, Teterboro, and White Plains, we average about 5,000 operations a day.
Wow.
And if you think about that, it's generally a 17 to 20 mile range,
Right.
area, piece of airspace. When you think about that, there's no place like that in the country
Right.
that with that
Things
volume
happen
of
very
traffic.
fast in that
Right.
short distance.
Right. And there's a lot of interaction. There's a lot of complexities involved in that. Certain runway configurations affect other airports. Not as bad as most people may think. Some people think that if Newark changes runways, LaGuardia has to change runways. Not necessarily true. They do generally run independently, with the exception of Newark and Teterboro. Newark and Teterboro have to be on the same flow.
Okay.
But there are some configurations, especially in poor weather conditions, that really do impact the airspace.
Yeah, and I'm going to pop that up, and when we put this all together, I'm going to pop a few pictures up, just the flight chart, the airspace, to remind everybody, those that are familiar with airspace a bit. Yeah, but when you look at it, there's no place to hide.
Right.
You better
Right.
know what you're doing and have yourself well coordinated. How does just for my information, can you kind of describe the role of the Port Authority, kind of in a bigger picture? How does that fit in? I think when I think of FAA, I think of all kinds of things, and like you said, most people probably think of air traffic control, but there's all kinds of, I'm sure there's safety and this, a lot of stuff going on. But how does the Port Authority, what are their responsibilities and their general mission as it comes to this airspace?
Okay, so the Port Authority has a very big portfolio of properties. We operate the Port of Newark. We operate bridges and tunnels that connect New York and New Jersey.
Okay. Yep.
So that's the key factor, connection of New York and New Jersey. So bridges and tunnels that connect those two. People always ask about the Verrazano Bridge to us, and no, because Verrazano connects New York City to New York City, right? It's Brooklyn to Staten Island.
Okay.
But when you look at the Goethals Bridge or the Outer Bridge, now those are New York, New Jersey. Those are run by us.
Okay.
So we're responsible for that. The George Washington Bridge is one of ours. We also run the Port Authority Bus Terminal, which is one of our major projects. They're starting the reconstruction of that building. I believe it's 75 plus years old. And then we get into the airports, right? Oh, one other thing. We have a small rail line that connects New York and New Jersey. It goes to the World Trade Center, also goes to 14th Street in New York City, Hoboken.
It goes across the way. It goes
goes
over on
across the
the
way.
George Washington then? How does
No,
it go?
no, it's all downtown.
Okay, all done. All right.
All downtown. So we have that as well. And then we get into the airports. So we own 5 airports: Newark, LaGuardia, Kennedy, Teterboro, and Stewart. Stewart's the latest addition. Stewart's had it's had periods where it's had fairly busy traffic, but it just hasn't grown as expected. Airlines come and go. We have low-cost carriers there sometimes. We had international operations quite a bit, very successful a couple of years ago. But it always seems to stall at some point, and then we get we have some flights, but just basic flights. We have several
And
airlines.
where's Stewart relative? Help me with my geography. Where's that at relative to
So
things?
Stewart is in Newburgh, New York, which is about 50 to 60 miles north of New York City, just west of the Hudson River. But it is at the intersection of 2 major highways. You got the Thruway and Route 84. It's a very large piece of airspace. They have a very large runway. In fact, it was an alternate for the space shuttle, one of the alternates for the space shuttle. It's a former Air Force base. We still have an Air National Guard deployed there.
Yeah.
But it's just not as busy as we would like it. We would like it to be more of an offset for the New York area. Cargo operations are pretty big there. So we're always looking at ways to increase the operations there at Stewart.
So when you say that the Port Authority owns an airport, that means you own the property. You're responsible for all the you support the airlines. Then I guess at this And how does some of that work?
So how it works is our responsibility is the airport.
Okay.
Okay, we maintain the runways, taxiways. We work very closely with DFA's airport division. They have a separate airport division, and there's criteria that we have to follow. Part 139 criteria. That's what we follow, and we have to maintain that for our airports.
Okay.
Some of the criteria is very difficult to meet sometimes, especially since our airports are pretty old. So we can get waivers on certain criteria, but eventually the FAA would like us to modify those projects, whether it's a construction project in the future. Anytime we do a construction project, we'll look at the runway or the taxiway, and if we can change the geometry to meet the FAA requirements, we'll attempt to do that. It obviously costs a lot of money to maintain the airports and runways. These projects, if I told you some of the costs, you probably wouldn't believe it. But it's, it's very important to maintain the safety of the system. And that's really what our main focus is, safe operations of the airport.
Okay.
But we have, let me talk a little bit more about the people. We have a staff of operation folks, maintenance folks. So each airport has a very large group of Port Authority people as well, with the exception of Teterboro and Stewart. We have a small management group, but we contract that out to subcontractors. It's just easier to do that with those types of airports. But for the three majors, Newark, LaGuardia, Kennedy, we have our own, from management all the way down to operations staff, construction staff, planning. There's a tremendous amount of planning. There's people in the Port Authority that I work with that I never actually met. I always work with them on the phone. But there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes that people don't realize.
So for each one of the airports, they've got their own kind of management structure,
Yes.
and it varies in size and how many people and things like that. One more kind of detailed question. So do you say life safety stuff, like do you manage all that as well for the fire and
Yes.
all those guys and all that? They fall under the Port Authority, or are they under something else?
Yes, so the ARF, as we call them, or Airport Rescue and Firefighting,
Okay.
we're required to have those on the airports. So we have a group of firefighters. We also have our own police department, which I forgot to mention. And the one other area I forgot to mention is the World Trade Center complex. Okay, so we own that World Trade Center complex. A lot of people didn't realize that.
Wow. Okay.
And obviously it was rebuilt. That we had to put up money for that. It's managed by a separate entity, but we own the property. In fact, the headquarters, Port Authority headquarters, is downtown in Full World Trade Center. We do have people in other buildings, but the main, headquarters is down in Full World Trade Center. That's actually where my office is.
Okay.
But just because of my job, I spend most of my time in the airports at the various locations.
And I just want to say that while construction can be disruptive, the times that I've come in and out, it seems. I mean, I don't being in the construction business myself from a totally different perspective. It's just must be mind-boggling, the steps along the way, that everything must have an influence on something else. When you go left instead of right, and what that does to people coming and going. And I truly appreciate when you say we're 2 years out in front of it. That almost seems like a short time frame, truthfully, in today's world, for what you have to navigate and materials and manpower, all that. So hats off.
It's challenging. I will give you that. I could tell you some stories of some meetings that we had, but but the important thing is we work very closely with air traffic, the tower in particular, to address their concerns, and then we open it up to the broader community to get everybody else's concerns. And then we basically negotiated and come up with the best plan for everyone. You can't make everybody happy, though, I will tell you that. But we do the best we can.
And I think this is going to go back to the continued theme. And that's what I was hoping to share here with our audience, is how big behind the curtain is to all of these things. When as just a normal civilian coming in, going, they're thinking about getting to Terminal A, getting through TSA, and getting on their plane. But what happens, and that is part of the experience behind the scenes, is just, I hope people take that away.
Yeah. And the redevelopment, you kind of touched on the redevelopment, right? That's its own entity, right? So you have a manager, you got a manager of that, but then you have redevelopment at each of the major airports.
Right.
You know, LaGuardia, we're finished with the Terminal B and C redevelopment. The airport's beautiful, been recognized many times to be one of the best airports in the country. And that's a pretty significant accomplishment, given that we were considered one of the worst at one point, right? And it wasn't that many years ago. So.
Well, and I got to tell you, walking through the terminal today on my visit, it really is it's a pretty airport. It just felt very comfortable, and it was clean, and you probably carried some legacy stuff from the past that you were making up some time on.
Right.
But it's well done, and I can tell you. You kind of favor the LaGuardia experience here a little bit.
Yeah. And we happen to be on the west side of the airport, which has not been redevelopment, but you know, this we have actually landmarks, right? This building is a landmark.
I would think
because
so.
this was actually one of the original terminals that we're in.
We're looking at some of the pictures behind us. As the room we're in has some really wonderful legacy pictures, and where we're sitting looks like it's been there for quite some time.
Yes. I forget the exact year, but this was one of the original terminals. When we go down the elevator, there's a picture out just by the elevator that shows this building with the aircraft behind it. And then we have Terminal A, which is also a landmark, which was restored, beautiful inside. The original terminal, that's where the Pan Am aircraft used to land in the water.
Okay.
And
Really?
take passengers. Yeah. If you go into that building, it's worth the trip if you have time.
Okay. Well, we will definitely do that. I'd like to hear some more about some of the project stuff, but to fill out what does a normal day look like for you? You kind of tipped us off a little bit. You're different places. You're never at home base there at downtown, but kind of help paint a picture of what a normal day looks like for Ralph.
So it normally kicks off somewhere between. I like to start early, so I'm in the office or wherever I'm going by 7:30, quarter to 8. Sometimes earlier, depending on the day. Typically have meetings starting at 8:30 in the morning, and many days run throughout the entire day. And since COVID, everything's virtual.
Mm-hmm.
So people will schedule meetings back to back. If they look at your calendar and see an open spot, there's going to be a meeting plugged in there. Where it wasn't like that when I first started. Obviously, we had to coordinate conference rooms. We had to gather people together. So it was much different when I first started. Now it's pretty consistent, and we don't meet in person as much as we used to. We're trying to shift towards that again, because that face-to-face is important. Many times I've traveled to DC for a 2-hour meeting in the same day. That's a long day, but it was so important to us to be face-to-face rather than phone calls. Now, people have kind of adapted to the virtual world, so we're actually pretty good, and we actually, in some cases, will choose to do virtual over in person. But that's it. It depends on what projects I have or what meetings I have. Like today, I actually have a LaGuardia surface meeting. That's one of the things I have to work on. And what we do with the LaGuardia surface meeting, we actually have a surface meeting for Newark, LaGuardia, and Kennedy, with a real focus on the surface of an airport. Something that didn't always get a lot of attention.
Surface from a traffic perspective, or
from an air traffic perspective.
Okay.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
How is the airport operating? LaGuardia is very susceptible to problems with weather, thunderstorms, things like that. That can really disrupt this airport. Winds, we've had a lot of windy days over the last couple of weeks. Again, that could be very disruptive to this airport, because we typically try to use both runways. with those windy days, we typically end up on a single runway operation.
Okay.
Which again, that is
That
a
slows
disruptive
things down.
operation. So I'll do the coordination. The service meetings include the FAA, various divisions in the FAA, from traffic management to air traffic to local air traffic, airlines, terminal operators. We really, what our goal was to bring the airport community together. And we tried to explain that, well, yes, you may work for a major airline. You really have to, here at this airport, and actually every airport, you really have to work together as a unit, regardless of who you work for, because that's what makes the airport run smooth. Most, an airline might think, well, I don't care about Terminal C operations. Well, if Terminal C has a problem,
Probably.
you're going to have a problem too. So it's really more of a community focused to bring everybody together and really do the best we can for the airport and not specific airlines. That's not what we're about. Our major focus now is de-icing, right? We're getting into that season. So that's a major coordination. That's another one of my projects. I handle the system that manages de-icing both here at LaGuardia and JFK. We're trying to do it at Newark, but we haven't progressed to that level yet. And it's really just it's a computer program that helps us manage the flow. We do a lot of remote de-icing. You also do de-icing at the gates. You have to manage all that. You don't want airplanes sitting on taxiways for too long because it blocks up the flow of traffic. So there's a lot of different complexities at each of these airports. With the new terminals here, the de-icing plan changed. So we had to adapt to that. Now, in fact, this year we're changing it again, just based on the last year's operation. We saw ways to improve. So we developed a procedure. Then we have to train everybody on it. And when we train the terminal operators, all the ramp controllers. We brief the airlines. So there's a lot involved in making what may seem as a simple change, right?
Right.
But it's a pretty significant undertaking to get everybody together and brief it. So that's another one of the things I do. I've worked on many of the next gen projects. Was a co-lead with a colleague from JetBlue. Did that for many years. Those projects have kind of been put on hold now. We do expect that they'll come back, those advisory committees. Just haven't seen a plan for those yet, but we do expect those to come back. Noise. You may think that my job doesn't get involved in noise, but actually it does. Community noise issues here are significant.
So close to the public.
Right. I mean, we're in neighborhoods.
Right.
LaGuardia in particular is in a neighborhood.
Right.
Right. So we do have to address those issues. When I was in the FAA, when I was in the last job, I was actually the spokesperson for noise from the New York TRACON. So I went to many public meetings, briefing people on what we do, why we do it, why our airplanes here. Because most people don't know, right?
That's right.
They don't really understand the system. So we tried to explain it, and it's challenging. But now, now we do everything virtually now, which makes it a little bit better. But we're dealing with a lot of noise issues, primarily JFK, LaGuardia, and believe it or not, Teterboro. Newark has kind of settled down with noise, but again, I have a call later today with a congressman actually to talk about noise.
Well, what you said a little bit earlier is you try to make as many people happy as you can in the situation. You're never gonna get everybody in the whole situation. You were mentioning, and I think that's a really, from a management and leadership perspective, that concept of virtual versus in person. Obviously, most people, a lot of people been working for several years, of course, went through that experience and converted themselves from someone who could never understand how you could work away and still get something done, and that became the norm. And I do think, I would imagine you must see a good bit of that the virtues of having your team together and the, versus just everybody. There's a lot of, just like we're sitting here today, the interaction, the body language, everything that goes
Right.
on is
Exactly.
part of the experience that I think gets lost there. And then people writing books on that. We won't decipher that one today. But I did notice also as we were getting ready this morning, I saw walking through your office, I saw a couple of conference rooms, like you talk about the training. I got to imagine Mike was saying that had a ground team in there that was learning some new
Right.
stuff and what's going on with the continuous change. So one thing that's probably constant is change in your
Right.
life and addressing it. I happened to see the de-icing equipment. I'm not sure it was transferring one terminal to the other there, and I thought to myself, won't be long before
Nope.
that's going to be up and running. And I know as a passenger, while I understand the safety and the need, when the pilot says, well, we're going to go over to the de-icing pad, you never know how that's going to sometimes turn out.
Right. Right.
Is that going to be you're the first in line, the fifth in line, and then how does that stage you up for your departure and
Right.
everything? And it sounds like those are the things that most people don't even understand, and hopefully after hearing how your interaction, and that's what you're working on, that back to that continuous improvement.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely always trying to improve. I mean, that is our goal. Make the operation more efficient, while maintaining safety. I mean, that is the critical items, right? And safety is a given. Like many of us will not specifically say safety, and because it's implied. We know that's the number one issue. So you always consider that regardless of what you're doing or recommending. So with de-icing in particular, there's different variations of de-icing. It's based on levels of snow. Sometimes aircraft de-icing, you're like, well, it's raining out. Yeah, well, aircraft fly in pretty harsh conditions sometimes. Right. Temperatures, in the upper altitudes are pretty low.
Right.
And even when that aircraft lands, there's still a chance that they could frost over.
Mm-hmm.
And de-icing has matured over many years. I remember the time when we didn't put much emphasis on de-icing. We honestly didn't. But there was several accidents that generated more regulations around de-icing, which obviously improved the safety of the system.
Absolutely, yeah. And they don't take a chance now. If there's any of a whisper, right. We're going right. for it, and that's grand.
Yeah, that's the way it should be.
You were mentioning Trade Center. Of course, Trade Center makes me think a little bit of being on the outside, but thinking about New York and 9/11 in particular. And so I'm trying to put my timeline together here, but you must have been with the FAA
Yep.
at that time. And is there, where were you at in that whole thing, and how did your role get impacted by that?
So at the time of 9/11, I was a operations manager / traffic management supervisor. I happened to work the night before, which in this area was a horrible thunderstorm night. Very bad thunderstorms, probably some of the worst we've seen. But if you remember 9/11, it was a beautiful day, beautiful fall day, or actually it was still summer, right? Because it was in early September. Clear skies. I worked late that night because of the delays from the thunderstorms. In fact, my mom called me and she said, plane crashed into the World Trade Center. I was like half asleep, and I'm like, what? Like, how could that happen? It's it's clear and 100 miles visibility, right? And as I was getting up and looking at the watching the news, I saw the second airplane hit, and that's what prompted me. I called the TRACON. I called the the ops manager. Said, what's going on? You need me to come in? Because I was scheduled to work that night. So my first thought is, do you need me to come in now?
Right.
Because I'll get ready. I'll come right in.
Right.
And they were like, no, we got plenty of people here. We're going to need you for the night shift. All right. So walk into work. A very somber mood, obviously. Several of us talked about actually going to Ground Zero to help out. But after discussion, we were like, well, look, we're going to be needed here, right? While there was no airplanes flying to speak of,
spooky.
There was a lot of coordination that needed to be done. Law enforcement was involved, both local and nationally. We had fighters flying around the airspace, which a lot of people probably did not realize. There was just a lot of activity that you had to keep track of who was there, why were, what was this aircraft doing. So it was actually a very stressful environment, even without the normal flight operations.
Right.
In fact, I tell people that was probably one of the more stressful weeks I spent in that building, just because of the intensity of the situation. And then, after, once the national ground stop was lifted, it slowly started to return to, I would say, somewhat normal operation. And then and the anniversary just passed. In November, we had the American Airlines crash in the Rockaways. And the first thought on that one was the same thing. Was this a terrorist attack, or was it something other than what we expected, or what would actually happen? So we actually did shut down the airspace again. Most people don't know that.
Oh, wow.
Because we kept it local. Right? We didn't close it nationally, but we closed it in the New York area. We told people, let's shut down departures. Don't take any arrivals, but if aircraft are leaving the airspace, just let them leave. It wasn't as restrictive as 9/11. And we waited, we waited to try to find out more about what exactly happened. And then it was pretty apparent that it wasn't terrorism. There was no calls made, nothing like that. So,
Right.
And then after, I think it was about an hour or so, that we reopened the airspace and let everybody go. But it was just, that was a second traumatic experience after 9/11 that most people don't realize happened, and that, it took us a while to recover from that again, to get back to what I would consider a normal operation.
So there was clearly and probably a multitude of things that maybe changed in your day in, day out operations from after 9/11 and thinking about protocols and from again, that behind the scenes that people don't understand, and when something happens and shutting down airspace and preparing,
One aspect of 9/11 is, and I don't want to say hijackings were routine, but, in my early days working, hijackings were still happening. They actually were still happening, right?
Yeah.
And there was a procedure, and we would do the normal procedure with hijackings. But then we reached this period right before 9/11 that hijackings hadn't occurred in at least 10 years. So there wasn't that the same level of attention. And that is just something that was a part of the system. Hijackings were, again, not routine.
I remember him as a younger person and getting, a young adult that was, okay, this plane got hijacked. It was almost like okay, this just happened.
There were several I was involved in that were potential hijackings.
Okay.
Sometimes a pilot would say a word that might key it into it, and we would treat it seriously. Again, it was just interesting how there wasn't the same level of emphasis on it as time passes, because you don't experience it.
Right. So you were talking about, and I don't know if this is what you're referring to a little bit earlier about some of the things you're working on, but how is, you started off by saying that, and I've heard this, kind of the public's been hearing this for weeks. We'll talk about the government shutdown in a little while here, but we've been talking about, the technology being so far behind and how long it takes to catch up. I got to believe there's a multitude of reasons for that, some good, maybe not so good, but whatever, how it all takes place. But how is technology influencing things? I don't know how that's a book in itself, but AI, all these things that we're seeing in our kind of our normal lives. How are those things starting or will influence airport operations?
So we're just getting into the AI portion of it. We're just kind of scratching the surface of how useful it could be. There's still a lot of caution around it because it's not a perfect system yet. If it will ever be perfect, we don't really know that. But it is an interesting technology and how it could be used. But even Even drone work are concepts that could be used in an airport. And you would think it's opposite, but you could use drones to help minimize, risk to people. In fact, we use drones to do, and when I say we, the Port Authority uses drones to inspect bridges.
Okay, yeah.
Right. Rather
I've
than
seen
have a
that.
person physically do it, you
right.
have a drone, right? And
Right.
if they notice something, you can. And there's been a lot of advancements in that area. Pretty significant technology. But technology in the FAA in particular is very slow to roll out. The Port Authority has an innovation unit to try to promote some of these technologies. We looked at autonomous buses and shuttles and that type of thing. We actually had a demo of a piece of equipment called TaxiBot. What it was is actually would taxi the aircraft to the runway. Well, this is the concept. Taxi the aircraft to the runway without using the aircraft engines. It used the vehicle power,
Tow it.
save it, and it was controlled by the pilot. It wasn't a driver. The driver was there just to
Got a
return.
little joystick of some sort.
It was. They said it connected the same way that they would control if they were taxiing on their own.
Okay.
We evaluated it. While the concept is very good, the issue becomes is you have these vehicles which were very large. Is after they unhook the aircraft, they have to get back to the terminal.
Mm-hmm.
And air traffic didn't want them on the taxiways, understandably, because it just that's more congestion on the surface, which we don't need.
Right.
And we have a service road that takes the vehicle around runways and taxiways, but it's a very circuitous route, and it would take 30 to 40 minutes to get back to the terminal. There's not a lot of use for that. Even though it is a cost savings, it just wasn't viable because the airport wasn't designed for that, right? You have to realize our airports were designed a very long time ago. And while we've made improvements, we did build a couple of runways at JFK, but to try to do something to make major changes like that, first, it's very expensive and just takes a very long time. We plan runways to be rehabilitated at least every 10 years. So that's actually part of the plan.
Well, that's got to be going on all the time then at this point with all those facilities. You got to have runway work going on.
So it's kind of unique. I know we went back to construction, but what's unique is each of our airports is different, right? So Kennedy, we did 3 to 4 runways in concrete. That has a much longer lifespan.
Service life?
They say roughly 30 to 40 years. Okay. So that's, we have to do repairs on occasion, but not to the same level as taking out a whole runway.
Okay.
But we still have one runway that's asphalt that's coming up for rehabilitation in a couple of years. We're just starting the planning now, right? Newark, they have 3 runways, and we just finished the 3rd runway. So we did all 3 of them pretty close together. Within let's say a 5-year span, we did 3 runways. So now we're good for roughly another 5 to 6 years before we have to start the process over again. But the impact in Newark's operation can be significant taking one of the runways out. LaGuardia, because both runways are very critical, they do nights and weekends. That's it. Right. They don't close a runway during the day.
Right.
Just because of the impact to the operation. So that's how LaGuardia does it and has done that for many, many years, very successfully. Teterboro also does nights and weekends. And when we say weekends, they'll close like Friday night, be closed all day Saturday, and then open like midday Sunday, because that's really the slowest period. For an airport like LaGuardia, that's the slowest period, besides the overnight.
So when you get, and I'm not sure if I cut you off or not on that, but I want to make sure I got it here. Bringing new technology in, is it driven, whether it's from the controllers, the 12-inch monitor that was the most important, we changed that out, those type of things. Is that driven more by available technology, the money, or just the desire to go through a little bit of pain and suffering and the change out?
So the projects are developed typically somebody in the FA, not necessarily controller driven, could be, but not necessarily. Um, and then the project starts to develop. Obviously, the FA has to get funding. They look at timelines. There's a lot of facilities across the country, so it's
Right.
not like it's a small
Right.
undertaking. Um, a lot of the issues become in just the way the government allocates funds, right? We've been we're under CRs for many, many years. Right after I started here in the Port Authority, it was constant, right? Every couple of months we went through another CR. And, when you have unstable financing, you
Sorry.
can't really invest in anything.
Okay.
There has been a tendency to stay away from New York with newer technology, which was always a level of frustration with me. And this goes back to when I was in the FA. I like new technology. I'd like to, test it out, be part of the development of it, because many times we would get this program that was developed in some lab, and they give it to us, and they say, "Oh, look at this program."
How great
and
is
we're
this?
like, "This doesn't work for us,"
Right.
And we're like, "What do you mean?" They're like, "What do you mean it doesn't work for me? I can't use that. Can it do this, 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 and this?" And that's where we used to suffer, because we would get these, final,
Some
projects, and it was like, this doesn't work.
didn't engage get your perspective in
Right.
there, get you involved, and know that it was going to be something that you could really use. And
Right.
that's where I think someone like yourself and your team with that type of experience, hands-on from a controller, seeing how the airport, you can someone that's just developing off somewhere else is not
Yeah.
going to have that collaboration and opportunity for
And
success.
I did work on several projects where controllers were involved, and the FAA has moved more towards that, which is great, because that's really how you develop it. But it still needs to be at the local level. I still think that's part of what's missing, because how each tower operates a little differently.
different.
Even approach controls operate a little bit differently, and I always wanted a prototype. Give me a prototype. Let us work with the programmer, and we will develop the system to make it as best the most useful piece of equipment for us. And that's how we worked. There was a lot of reluctance with prototypes, though, because it's not a proven system.
Well, I can't even imagine. I'd like to think I could, that what you have to go through again to get the funding, and it takes years to develop these things. And I got that fragmented, money and color of money and where it's coming from and everything else is probably got to be some significant roadblocks.
Yeah,
So while, which kind of leads me, I think just maybe a great time that, we were, before we got started, we all heard till just a couple days ago, 2, 3 days, I lost track of time, the government shut down, and what was on the news all the time was about the influence to air traffic control. Now, I was trying to decipher myself, thinking, okay, if I'm in this space, do we really not have enough players? And we were cutting back and all what the
Right.
public went through. But what was that like? Was it as bad as they made it out to be? How did that all play out?
So I was involved in a couple of government shutdowns while I was controller, and we understand that we're required personnel. We have to be there, right? And that's understood. And while you might not be getting your normal paycheck, you do eventually get, which it kind of, adds more stress to the system. I don't understand why we can't develop a system where the essential personnel get paid while they're working. I mean, we should be able to do that, right?
Right.
I mean, in this day and age, I think we can do that. It just adds an additional level of stress. Two of my kids are controllers right now, so
Really?
they had to deal with that. But and this would happen to be the longest one ever, right? So that just added to the stress level. But hopefully they've made them whole, or will make it whole pretty quickly, so they can deal with their financial issues. The only real difference I'll say now as compared to when I was a controller is when I was a controller, no one, the only people at work were operational folks. So if you were in the operation directly, then you worked. Everybody else was gone. Nowadays, they've kept more and more people as part of the operation, which is good because there's a lot of other activities that go on behind the scenes that people don't realize that are important and critical to the operation.
So Ralph, you'd mentioned that you kind of back to a family. Family is always a big part of what we do and why we do it and the outcomes. But you mentioned you had coincidentally had a couple of children that are in air traffic control now. So
That's correct.
Your family, how many?
So I
kids
have
you have?
three children, one girl and two boys. Both boys, I'll say, followed in my footsteps. Not that I pushed them that way.
Okay.
I did not actually. The only requirement I had for all of them was they had to get a degree in
Okay.
something.
Okay.
So they all went to college, all got degrees. In fact, my daughter had a job as well as an air traffic controller, but she chose not to take it.
Okay.
She wanted to go a different path, which is perfectly fine.
Right, right.
Again, I did not force it. I found it to be a very rewarding career. I sat down with each of them and explained the good parts and the bad parts.
Right.
Because you do work holidays and weekends and things that most people don't work, right?
Right.
So there are aspects of it that are a little difficult to deal with. But my two sons decided to do it, and they enjoy the job. One is a supervisor at JFK Tower,
Okay.
and the other one is a controller in New York Center, which is the high altitude facilities. He started his career down in Atlanta. Believe it or not, when he started, they didn't have any slots for New York, which I chuckled about because
Right.
I always know there's slots here in
Right.
New York, right? So he was down in Atlanta for a few years and then chose to come back to New York. So it's great they all live on Long Island, so it's great having them close by. I now have 4 grandchildren as well. Which is also great to see them and spend time with them. So it's been great. Again, air traffic is a great career. There's a lot of negativity around it, with the stress levels and things like that. But, it really is an excellent career. I would recommend it to anyone that's interested. And also, there's a lot of benefits to it. You can retire early if you like. I know that's been a big subject. It probably does need to be updated. Right now, if you're an active controller, you have to retire at age 56 or when you turn 56. But but that's a rule from like the 70s. Big change, and people take care of themselves a little bit better, I think.
Right.
Your longevity, your mental state, everything is a little bit, I'll say, better now than it was. Plus, a lot of people don't want to retire at 56.
Right.
You're still pretty young,
Yeah.
and you might have kids in college at that point.
Right.
So what a lot of controllers end up doing, they'll retire and then do some other work. A lot of it is aviation related, but some is not.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I manage a couple of the people that I manage that work in the surface area for the airports, Newark and Kennedy in particular. Those are 2 of my former colleagues that I work with that have since retired from the FAA and now working for me in a different capacity.
Okay.
So it's
a small circle.
Yes, I was about to say that.
I was going to say it sounds like, because once you're into that, and I know that we all have our business circles, but I would imagine in your world too, you come into contact. You have lifelong relationships.
Yes.
from a work perspective.
And people can't get out of it. Like, I know one gentleman that's retired, airline representative, but he's still actively involved. He tries to stay on top of things. I just spoke to one of my former bosses, actually. He called me last week, and he's still, he's a few years older than me, and he's still actively involved. His focus now is advanced air mobility, which is a whole nother new generation of aircraft, which is actually pretty exciting. And that's one of my other projects that I'm working on.
The project list just keeps going on and on.
yes.
Well, you clearly, if you add some time up there, not that I'm adding any years here, clearly could take a different route. But I do think, and that's really part of the reason that we're sitting here talking today, that aviation is and the support and the system around it is, it gets in your system, and you really, you want to be around it.
Right.
You want to help do all the things you're talking about and learn more about it. So I could clearly see how it's hard to just you just don't turn it off.
Right.
Every day you see an aircraft up there, you're kind of thinking, okay, there's still something that happened that you knew about.
Yeah, and if you didn't catch the one thing about my family is, one son's in the tower, I was in the Tracon, and the other one's in the center, right? So we covered all three air traffic.
Thanks for that clarification.
So we have interesting conversations.
I was just going to say, I can imagine what you talk about at Thanksgiving.
Oh yeah, because the tower, we always had unique relationships.
Who
Towers,
had the best spot? Yeah. I
yeah.
can imagine there's some little bit of elbowing around the table.
Yeah, we joke about it all the time.
What a family affair. That's really, really wonderful. And it's so nice to hear that you've got that, relationships are all in the neighborhood, more or less, and the grandchildren and all that. So hats off to you. Congratulations for all that success that your children have done so well. And I'm sure that's a pure reflection of your support and what you've been able to share with them about.
I try my best. That's for sure. So,
what do you do for, speaking of family, one more left, what do you do for fun when you're not here? It sounds like you're here quite a bit, but what do you like to do when you're not?
I mean, I've always been into cars. I do like old cars.
Okay.
I have a few, I will say, that are under progress, but that's one of my passions. I love spending time with my grandkids. Try to spend as much time as I can. Not as much as I would like right now, but they grow up too fast. Just like anything else. I always tell my kids that time begins to speed up once you have kids.
Yeah.
What you envision. It's just amazing how quickly it goes. Even me, I look back at my career and I still have a hard time believing that I've been involved in this over 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to see. And, now we got this new air traffic system being proposed, right? That's another huge step in that system.
And you want to bet, my gut says you want to be right in the middle of that too.
Yeah, it would be hard not to walk away from that, because it's a long time coming. It really is. I mean, while the system that's currently used is good, there are areas that definitely could be improved on. Make the controller's job more efficient, more easier.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure if I sat down with anybody and said, how could you make this better? They would have, hundreds of suggestions. So that's what I'm looking forward to. Hopefully it pans out as planned, but I do think that we'll see some pretty significant changes.
But I'm not going to ask you how long you're going to stay after this, because that I don't know that you even want to answer it, or it probably not it's not on your radar per se at this point.
People ask me, and I tell them when I stop having fun.
Right.
That's what it is. Right now, I'm still enjoying it. I still enjoy the work. I'd love to share my knowledge, and I just want to see things better.
Yeah.
I know where improvements can be made, and would like to see them implemented. That's been a big part of what I did for many years. But yeah, as long as I'm still having fun, I think I'll stick around a little while.
Well, and what you said earlier, and it's kind of been a constant theme. It's hard to replace experience with lack of experience, and I am sure that you're well respected in what you do, and bringing that experience to it is worth its weight in gold. So I got to believe that there's a number of people that they've got their arms, and you're not going anywhere for a long time, and you've been a real influence on the success of the New York airspace. Has there been, I wanted to ask this earlier, and maybe I'll try to get the timing right here, but been a day or a situation that went less than perfect? When you think about, is there something that strikes you as whether it was an air traffic control time period or just the things that just didn't go well? Um,
Well, I could pick,
and you probably got a couple of them, but I was just
yeah.
curious if there's to kind of share what, again, what's going on behind the scenes is something that people wouldn't understand, that there was something going on that you and your team may have had to address.
I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier. That September 10th of 2001
Yeah.
was a pretty memorable day from a thunderstorm activity and a very poor operation. We always struggled during thunderstorms, and a lot of people don't really understand that either. We'll say it's thunderstorm activity. Meanwhile, you're sitting in your house and it didn't even rain.
Right.
Right? Well, what do you mean by that? And we try to explain that. Well, a thunderstorm could be 100 miles away and impact our operation, especially because of the volume we generate. There's hours where we have, over 200 departures an hour. There's no other piece of airspace
Right.
that has that. Even the busiest airport in the
I
world.
think that's well worth
Right.
recognizing.
That's where we get impacted. And when you put a thunderstorm in the middle of that operation, the impact of that just reverberates through the system. And I just remember, I mean, that September 10th date sticks out because I remember after work, we all got together and went out for a drink because it was such a bad evening. So there had to be something in there. I don't remember all the specifics, but it was typical, that during severe weather, we call it SWAP,
Okay.
which is Severe
SWAP.
Weather Avoidance Plan.
Okay.
So it's just the acronym that we use. So anytime there's thunderstorms, we say it's SWAP. So people
Okay.
know it. If you talk about
So I'm
in
gonna
the
use,
Port
I didn't
Authority,
know that. I'm gonna start using
it's
that
just
term and see how that plays.
yeah. Anybody in the New York area knows exactly what SWAP is.
Okay.
And our job. I was in traffic management at that point, and our job is to try to maintain the flow of traffic. Whether it's reduced, we have to slow the arrivals down to help manage the departure flow. Because the worst thing that can happen on an airport is we call gridlock, which we have so many airplanes on the ground that you can't move around. Now you put the airport in a very bad light, right? That's what we try to avoid. LaGuardia is very susceptible to gridlock because of the small footprint, right? But I've seen LaGuardia in gridlock, I've seen Newark in gridlock, and I've seen JFK very, very close to gridlock, which it takes a lot to get that airport in gridlock because it's very large, right? But that night in particular, there was a lot of thunderstorms, and there's a lot of coordination that happens behind the scenes. I'm talking to the tower who's working a particular departure. I want him to go over a different route. All that was done manual coordination, all via phone, but it was all manual coordination. And
That's
even
amazing
now,
that you're...
we haven't, and this is with the frustration level. That was 20-something years ago. We still use that same process. When nowadays, we should have a much more automated system, like I want this airplane to go over this route. And there have been things developed, it's just not implemented yet. And we're hoping to start seeing it in the 2026 swap season. And swap season happens to coincide with the busiest travel season, which is the summertime.
Okay, yeah, because
So-
those thunderstorms that come and go.
You're just throwing another monkey wrench into the operation. And one thing that has changed years ago when I first started, the summer months, June, July, and August were your peak times. Once September hit, traffic dropped pretty dramatically and stayed that way except for a couple of days before holiday, before Thanksgiving, a couple of days before Christmas. Now what has changed is the demand, and this is all after COVID, does not really drop after the summer. It does, but not to the same level that it used to.
Okay.
And it continues.
So more people are traveling?
More people travel. The Port Authority has set, we base a lot of our counts on passenger counts. We've set, passenger records, and in particular JFK. And when you think about all the construction that's going on at JFK with the redevelopment, we had all these passengers and we were able to keep the surface moving. If you haven't been to Kennedy, lately.
I haven't.
The roadways we're at probably the peak impact point of construction between all the roadways being modified, terminals being modified. So we'll start to see some improvements. I'll give you an example with JFK. A lot of the controllers are no longer driving in because it takes so long to get off the airport. They take the train in because they can get to the tower direct connection. Even my son, he lives out east.
Wow.
He takes the train in because it's just so much easier.
Well, you know, it's funny. Before we started, we were kind of making light of technology with just email.
Yep.
Right? We talked about how things have changed, and there's just a tool that everybody uses and how that changed. But when I hear you saying we're still picking up phones and talking between people, that's really just an interesting. I know it's, again, not intentional. It takes a lot of time for development, and I sense you'll figure that out.
Well, we're actually working on a program right now that we're sponsoring for the three major airports, and we're using one of our tools to actually do electronic communications. That was done via voice between pilots, controllers, and ramp control. So we've kind of automated that system to where it's just a display in a tower.
Wow.
That they could just glance up, see what they need to know, get the information they need, and direct the aircraft. We've implemented it at Newark and LaGuardia very successfully. JFK, we just started the implementation. Still going through some rough spots, but we'll get to the point where it actually will save controllers time, pilots time, and ramp control time. So it is a very unique idea, and looking forward to actually seeing that fully implemented.
You know, one of my takeaways from our discussion is it just keeps coming back is all the integration from so many teams, different aspects of this. There's nothing that doesn't take place. That this is a team sport.
Right. Absolutely.
For all the things, and I kind of that's where we were starting. The people that just get on a plane, or maybe even our general aviation friends or whatever, that are going up and talking to controllers. Okay, we're talking to one or two controllers, or an area network. But the true appreciation for what goes on behind the scenes and what you shared, whether you talked about weather, you talked about all the influences, and what this is a game of. It's a game of managing change.
Yes, absolutely.
So you're the change manager on a day-to-day basis. So I kind of reflect also on what you talked about, what a normal day looks like. I now, as I think through that question, there's no such thing, I guess, and the change in what your team does. And the other thing that I want to make it's loud and clear to me is the way you talk and speak to the dynamics of all the airports, the dynamics of the construction project, the dynamics of the air country, and the people. And at the end of the day, I got to believe, it's really the people that are pulling that. It's always a people game.
That has been the game since day one. It's all about the people. You have all these, all these tools to work with, but it's really the people that make the air traffic system safe and as efficient as it can be. Can we do things to improve the operation? Absolutely. There's a lot of technology that's been developed over the last 10 years that really would help the operation out. And we want to see those things implemented here, just because we need a lot of help to be as efficient as possible.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful conversation. I once again thank you for taking the time. I know it's been just a real pleasure talking to you about it, and you're a busy person, so appreciate you carving some time out for me. I'd also, it's clear to me that, those who are watching, if you're flying in and out of New York airspace, I feel comfortable in saying, you've got your fingerprint on some aspect of that, the safety and the efficiency and the improvement.
Yeah,
and
thanks, Wade. Pleasure to meet you. This was a great conversation. Anytime you want to continue it,
I'm probably going to take you. I think we got more to talk about, but I just, once again, thank you for the time. Thank you for your experience. Thank you for your contribution. It's part of the spirit of why I'm doing this also, is to just, bring safety forward.
Right.
to bring people's knowledge of what goes on behind the scenes, because I would guess that many people don't know
No,
that, myself included.
they absolutely don't. And it's it's a pretty again, it's a very important operation. It's very critical. People don't realize how involved it can be, and all the different pieces that go on to make this successful operation every day.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
it goes on around the clock. So thank you very much
my
for
pleasure.
the time. And as always, I hope you enjoyed it, and to hear the background, Ralph's background in this, not only the airspace in New York, but all the different aspects that go on. And I know I've learned a lot today. And, as always, we say here, watch out for that turbulence, look for those blue skies, and we look forward to engaging with you in the next Old Fly Guy conversation.